going to look at today, the reason all of you are in here, again, you might be saying, why is it that I'm in here when I'm not part of the, research team of teachers? Why is it that I'm in here when I'm not an ELA teacher, when you're a literacy specialist? The reason is because with the implementation of the Common Core State Standards, all teachers are going to be involved in teaching literacy skills to their students. Literacy skills so that the students will be successful in their content. And so that's part of what we're going to be looking at today. What I'm going to do is present to you two of the really big areas for this, and that is the research piece and also writing informative expository text, because that would be what would be affecting all of you. Then you will determine, okay, so now that I've looked at this big picture of what it is that we're expecting kids to be able to do successfully, to be able to do the kinds of tasks they're going to have to do on the Common Core assessments, what can my responsibility be toward instructing students so that they're getting this instruction across the day? There are a couple of things that we're going to be seeing here as far as some numbers, and those numbers are going to be across the day, not just in the ELA classroom. So, without further ado, we'll continue on now. And get a little quicker here. But, well, before I continue on, anybody have any questions at this point? Or wondering, something that you were wondering about? Troy has one of I'll just mention this, one of the performance tasks that we're talking about. He has an example of that that he received at a meeting he attended yesterday. So we'll be looking at these types of performance tasks, and you'll be doing that here in your school and really taking a look at, okay, so how can we use this information, the kinds of things kids are going to have to do on this assessment, and how can we plan backwards to see what do we need to teach kids so that they're going to be successful at doing this. And we're going to be doing, you will be doing it, and we will be doing this a lot this year, and next year, and the next year, and forevermore now, until something new comes along. Okay, so implementing Common Core State Standards through HPLC, which is High Progress Literacy Classrooms, and this is engaging writers grades 6 through 12, informative explanatory writing. This is a revised version of the professional development that we are doing statewide. We do a day on narrative writing, a day on argument writing, and a day on informative explanatory writing. And I say revised because I did, take some things out and added some things in to more meet the needs of Bamberg Ehrhardt Middle School. So as we're thinking about why we want to explore this, one of the reasons is that in writing Common Core State Standards, the authors and the whole group of think tank that got together, several years ago now, actually went back to the colleges, universities, and employers and said, what is it you want students to be able to do when they leave high school? This is one of the things that they want them to be able to do. They want students to be able to conduct research and apply that research to solve problems or address a particular issue. So you can see that in mathematics that would apply, in social studies, in science, in English language arts, in PE, in every single subject that we teach at the middle school. This is going to apply. So everyone is responsible in some way for helping students be able to do this. Okay? They want students to be able to identify areas for research. Not that we hand everything to them, but that they go through the process of identifying what are some areas that need some research, so that they know how to narrow the topics and adjust, oops, Ruth got it loud then, and adjust the research methodology as necessary, and evaluate and synthesize primary and secondary resources as they develop and define their own conclusions. Now, that says a whole lot right there as to what our kids need to know how to be able to do if they're going to be successful at doing what's going to be expected of them. This whole area right here where it's talking about narrow the topics and adjust the research methodology. It's not we adjust it for them, we've got to teach them how to adjust the research methodology, because whatever they are researching calls for it. They've got to be able to make those decisions. We're working toward independence, toward students being able to independently make decisions. And this evaluate and synthesize primary and secondary resources. You know, there's really that, you know, so much of social studies is, you know, dependent upon primary and secondary resources. Students have got to be able to determine what is a primary resource, what is a secondary resource, and they've got to be able to evaluate those sources. Not just take at, at face value that this is accurate. They've got to be able to evaluate those and then develop their own conclusions and defend their own conclusions. So there's where some of that argument work comes into play too. They've got to be able to apply skills and knowledge across content area to solve real world problems. Not just the kinds of problems that we, might, think up a scenario for them. We really want them to be able to apply this to real world problems. And a lot of the performance tasks that they're going to be having to be successful at as they take these assessments, a lot of those are going to be based on real world problems. And these students are going to have multiple resources that they will have to be able to read, understand, take notes on, synthesize across multiple sources, print and non-print sources, primary and secondary documents. They've got to be able to do all of that to be successful. And that's a lot. And then finally, they've got to be able to model real-world situations and persevere in solving complex and novel problems. That perseverance is very key there too. So, this is why we're here today. So that we can start thinking about, okay, so what does instruction need to look like if our kids are going to be successful at being able to do this? So as we look at research on engaged reading and achievement in the upper grades, when we came into Bamberg Ehrhardt Middle School right at the beginning of this year, again we were looking. All we had done a meta-analysis on at that point was the research that had been done in elementary schools. And I'm going to just tell you, Mr. Phillips called us on that. He said, but what about the research that's been done on middle schools and secondary schools? Is it the same? And while we had gathered that research, we hadn't had a chance yet to really read that and study it. And we have now. And I have for you, again, a synthesis of that research. And what I want you to do right now, we're not going to take time to read. It's just a 3-page document. It lists all of the, not every single one, but the major research documents that we studied. What I want you to do is to look at the highlighted parts of this document, the bolded parts. And at your tables, I want you to have a conversation around, okay, so what is this saying to us as teachers in middle school? So what is this research telling us? Students need to be more independent. And talk a little bit more about that. What are you meaning by that? Yes, they've got to read a lot more than we've ever had students reading before. We can't count on a lot of reading happening at home. So we've got to make sure it happens in school.
And then they need to read more, but they need to know what they're reading.
Exactly.
That's what we were talking about over here, because I've got kids that'll bring in and out. And they might read enough that they can pass the test, but I'll ask them, now do you really know what you read?
Yeah, and the thing is with the assessments that are going to be accompanying, Common Core, they're going to have to read complex text. They're going to have strategies for going back into that text and really breaking it down and being able to give evidence for whatever response they're giving. Just give the response or just pick, the multiple choice answer is not going to be the way, they're going to be assessed. So we've got to teach them, how to do that. And that's really what that number one is, students, looking at those numbered ones on that first page, all students need to read a lot for, actually it's number 2. Students need to be able to read and understand complex texts that put them on target for graduating with the ability to read college level text when they graduate from high school.
I was talking, with what was the thing I had, the projects.
The performance tasks.
Mm-hmm. One of the after they do the different items, when it gets time to actually, they are allowed to use notes that they've taken from their reading, and that's not something that we do a lot.
Right, so that's going to have to become commonplace.
And then when they're teaching them, when they're reading a particular text of whatever style or genre, what notes are important.
Exactly.
Because they'll copy the whole thing.
Yes. This is talking a lot about being able to read and understand, text, and then, taking notes on the text that they're reading, and then taking those notes, being able to synthesize everything, and then they've got a written response. It's not just a few lines. It's an argument. In most cases, they're going to have to be writing, an argument for some, conclusion they've come to, and they've got to be able to, support that in multiple ways in their response. A lot of the performance tasks are science-based. A lot of the performance tasks are social studies-based, and then some of them have literature in there too. So we've got social studies, science, and literature. Then in math, the new standards in math, they're going to have performance tasks, and they're going to have to be able to write their way into the understanding that they have there too. So writing is going to be a huge piece. Writing has kind of taken a back burner the last few years in South Carolina because we stopped assessing at every grade level. And now what we're finding is, whereas in South Carolina our assessment did a lot more with narrative responses, writing a description of something or a narrative of that. That's what we focused on more. Now we're going to see their argument is going to be huge, and the informative explanatory writing is going to be huge. So we really need to shift our focus. We don't do away with narrative, because the narrative that they're going to have to write, the expectations have been ramped up, way up from what our students have been required to do, expected to do. So writing is a huge piece, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Even though this focuses a lot on reading, this research we're looking at, what it focuses on too is that they're going to have to be able to write about the understanding they have of their reading. Now, while today's focus is not on reading, I do want to point out a text that I think, I just got this text a few weeks ago, and it's Close Reading of Informational Text, Assessment-Driven Instruction in Grades 3 through 8. This will, give you the kinds of strategies that you need to, that all content areas can use to help kids in understanding that informational text that they're reading. So this was not on the original list of books that I gave you because I got this after that. So if you want to take a look at that, that would be a great book for every teacher to have a copy of, because they can go back into it and actually get strategies out of it that they can you all can use in your teaching. There is one that this talks about informational text, and then there's one that the ELA teachers will be interested in called Notice and Note, and that's close reading strategies for teaching the reading of narrative types of text novels. So we have that, both of those will give us the kinds of strategies we can be teaching kids. They're going to help them be able to understand this complex text more deeply. And these are not the same kinds of strategies we've been using in classrooms. So, but we're getting more resources that will help us a lot with that. Okay, so thinking it down, what else are you noticing here? What is this research saying? We've got to read a lot. We've got to help kids have strategies to understand what they're reading and understand complex text. What else is it saying to us?
Developing vocabulary.
Yes. Developing domain-specific vocabulary. So, vocabulary that, everyday use vocabulary that is our kids haven't been using, and the domain-specific vocabulary. We've got to help develop that. And again, we've got to do that in ways that it's not, give kids a list of words to know, but give them strategies to figure out the words that they're encountering as they're reading the content material, as they're reading, informative text, as they're reading, novels, giving them strategies to be able to figure the words out. Yes.
It's also about using that vocabulary. It's not
Yes.
just about knowing it.
Yes.
I mean, if they're going to, when they grade that Common Core, I would think that there will be content-specific vocabulary that they are looking for the children to be able to use appropriately.
You are so right. It's the application of that vocabulary. And, just having a list of words that we memorize for a test is not taking us to the application level. We've got to be using that vocabulary constantly and have our kids respond using that vocabulary as well. Now, I've been in Amy's classroom many times, and I've seen that happening in her classroom. So I know what's going on, but what we need to do is we need to be talking and sharing, across different content areas with strategies we might be using that could help everybody get to that point. Okay, so what else are you noticing here?
Using a lot of different assessment tools.
Yes. There's a lot of formative assessment that we need to have going on here. Summative assessment is important, but formative assessment needs to be happening every day in the classroom. And that's not necessarily a paper pencil formative assessment. We need to have ways to gather data and make our decisions based on that data. I'm going to pick on Amy again. She said, why'd you ever come to my classroom? One day, when I was in her classroom one day, she was taking anecdotal notes of her students how they were doing with the performance tasks they were doing that day. And then she took the notes, then at the bottom of the sheet, she had a place where she said, okay, based on what I'm seeing here, this is something I know I need to teach. This is something we've been doing in ELA classrooms forever and a day. Taking anecdotals, conferring with kids as they're reading, taking anecdotal notes, and then on that information, based on that information, making some decisions as to small groups we want to pull together, something we want to teach, and so this needs to happen in our content classrooms as well. And you got someone right here in this school that's doing that in a content area. Anything else you noticed? Interventions, yes. And in addition to, not in place of interventions. So if we have kids who are struggling, they need to be double and triple dipped, not taken out of, you know, the ELA classroom, if that's the place where they really need, you know, some extra, you know, how-to kind of thing, but in addition to. And I think, you know, talking with Mr. Phillips, you know, y'all have like a period during the day where that can happen, where kids go, or I may be wrong on that, but you know, we need to have kids, you know, get that extra help, that intervention and whatever they need help in, but we don't take them out of that area that they need intervention in and think that given the, you know, going to, you know, having a pull out is going to help them if they're not getting what's going on in the classroom too. And that's really difficult to work out and to figure out schedule-wise, but that's something we need to have happening. You were going to say something, Rhonda.
This is what you're saying, Brother Clement, but it says in here too, for the students that are not progressing well, to provide feedback and coaching, and
Yeah.
that to me is what I do that I think is, I see the biggest improvement when you're talking one-on-one, and they may have to do it, some people may have to do it 3 or 4 times, but you keep going over each time, and each time they see a difference, and in the meantime, others have a different writing thing, or they're reading independently, and
Yeah, so within the classroom itself,
yeah, it works.
that intervention where we're conferring with students and we're seeing they need more instruction, we're providing that instruction in the classroom, either one-on-one or in small group situations. And one of the things that I'm going to mention in here is actually embedded in one of the points here, and that is in number 3. Students need to learn strategies for constructing meaning. That is, to me, a huge thing, and that we want to teach students how to construct their own meaning. Not provide meaning to them, but here are some ways, here's some strategies you can use for constructing your own meaning. And that's what that, the book that's going around, that does a lot of that. Another book that I'm reading right now is called What Do Readers Really Do? And that book is all about strategies for, this is what as a reader I do to construct meaning, so I need to teach the students the strategies that readers use to construct their own meaning. And by readers, I'm not just talking again in an ELA classroom, I'm talking about in every context, every content. Our students, we need to be teaching them how to construct their own meaning.
Yeah, I think that's very, especially in you might agree or disagree. In science, that's very important because if they can get the process or whatever's going on, they won't get wrapped up in the difficult vocabulary that's in science, because when they see that, because it's so like a foreign language, they tune out. But if they can get the overall, then they can fill in with the vocabulary that's more difficult than what they're used to.
Yeah.
It's scary to them.
Yeah. So they, you know, like I said, we've got to give them strategies for figuring out, okay, so because I'm not going to always have the teacher with me. And I'm going to be in assessment situations and in real world situations where I need to know how to make meaning of whatever I'm being, you know, faced with. Okay, so here we've looked at what it is that colleges, universities, and employers are looking for. We've looked at what the research is saying. Now, you may have noticed as you paid, you know, if you have the chance to even dip into this, most of this research is done in high schools. We found very little research that was done actually in middle schools, but in every case, when they said secondary, they were talking about grades 6 through 12.
That's where we're trying to move.
So, you know, that's where, you know, we have elementary studies that are, you know, K, 5, and then secondary studies that are 6, 12. So, you know, this, you know, this goes right along with, what we're talking about here. One other thing I'm going to point out is in the 90-90-90 study schools, again, to go back to what our focus is today, one of the things that they said made a huge difference in the 90-90-90 schools was in every single content, every classroom, students were writing informational text. They were writing, in response to the learning, they were taking that, synthesizing it, summarizing it. So it wasn't just a matter of taking notes, it was doing something with those notes. And then, doing, a lot of writing of that informational text. Okay, so we take all that, we add in the expectations of the Common Core state standards, and then we can make this statement saying that this is what we want. We want all students actively engaged in using language, reading, writing, speaking, and listening to construct knowledge and understanding in every content area. This is something that we want to work toward, is having every student actively engaged in constructing their own meaning through these language processes: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So these are a couple questions we can always ask ourselves as we're planning for instruction. How will students be actively engaged in order to construct knowledge, meaning, understanding? Will they be reading to construct meaning? Will they be writing to construct meaning? Will they be talking to construct meaning? Will they be doing a combination of listening and taking notes? Listening and then saying back, talking. But they need to be using language themselves to construct meaning. Actively engaged in constructing meaning. And then, how are the students using reading, writing, speaking, and listening to construct the knowledge meaning? So, what is it they're going to actually be doing? Are they going to be reading, writing, speaking, listening? And then, how are they actually going to construct meaning, their own meaning? So these questions we keep in the back of our mind as we plan our instruction in whatever, area we teach. Okay. So, the essential role of the research skills in Common Core. We have a little bit of, before you actually live here, let's look at these research skills. There's an entire strand of the writing standards in K2 that's devoted to research to build and present, K12, to research to build and present knowledge. And in general, many other skills important to research are infused throughout the document. So this is something that is extremely important in what we're doing with Common Core state standards. Research to build knowledge, what we mean here is that the standards are going to expect students to learn to independently use a whole host of research-related skills to be able to do things such as, and then we have a long list we're going to go through here. But let's look at that a minute. Again, students being able to independently do this. So we've got to have, the gradual release of responsibility. All of you, I bet, know that. We've got to have a lot of demonstration up front, a lot of teacher-student, guided practice, and then moving to students doing this independently. We cannot just jump into them, assigning and them being able to do this independently. They've got to see what it is we're expecting them to do. We've got to give them some guided practice and then move to that independence. But these are some of the things that they're going to be expected to do. Conduct short as well as more sustained research projects. That's Writing Standard 7. They've got to gather relevant information from multiple print and digital sources and integrate the information while avoiding plagiarism. That's exactly what those performance tasks are asking them to be able to do. That's Writing Standard 8. They've got to be able to integrate and evaluate content presented in diverse formats. There's a reading standards coming in. There's that teaching them to closely read, giving them strategies to be able to do that. Assess, let's say, and then, let's say we've got, just within that where we have, where they have to integrate and evaluate, reading standards 7 and 9, writing standard 8, speaking and listening standards 2 and 3. So you can see how these standards are infused and meshed together. We don't just go down a list of standards and say check, check, check. We're infusing these. They've got to be able to assess the credibility and accuracy of each source. That's huge. There's writing standard 8, reading standard 7. They've got to acquire and use accurately a range of general academic and domain-specific words and phrases. Just what we're talking about. That's language standard 6. Draw evidence from literary or informational text. That's writing standard 9, which references that students must use the skills of all 10 reading standards. Infused, meshed together. So the new element will be that the Common Core expects students to apply the same standard of craftsmanship to informational writing as they would to short stories, memoirs, essays, and poems. So that being said, what they're saying here is the expectation is not just a dry list of facts. They've got to write informational text that has all the elements of crafting techniques that are expected in narrative types of writing. But we look at how the writers of informational text, how they craft that text. So it's going to take us really looking at a lot of different informational texts to see how a writer's doing that. Okay, a reader of the Common Core can quickly see that across all 3 kinds of writing, there's a parallel emphasis on elaborating with specific information, details, examples, and citations or quotes, and on synthesizing those details and specifics so they are linked to and controlled by key ideas or themes. Again, it's not just listing the facts. There's a lot that's going to be expected of the writing that our students are doing. And then I'm just going to, I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to read just a paragraph from the Common Core, Pathways to Common Core here. The standards require that writers of informational writing, like writers of fiction and essays, be given the opportunities to rehearse, draft, revise, and edit. Although an emphasis on writing process instruction is not explicit in the Common Core informational writing standards, in order to create well-structured, coherent, carefully crafted informational text, writers will need to be taught how to make and revise plans for a text, to study mentor text, to draft and revise and embellish and rethink a text, and to seek and use feedback from teachers and peers. Not only will they need to do all this within a writing workshop where the focus is on developing skills as writers, but they'll also have to transfer these skills to the content areas, doing this work on the run, quickly, in the service of discipline-based learning. So here's where the ELA teacher is going to have, a little bit, that responsibility for really teaching that writing process so that kids can apply that in the content classrooms on the run. The content area teacher is going to have to be helping to teach kids, the note-taking skills and the synthesis skills, so that information can go back into the ELA classroom. The ELA teacher can use that information to then write some pieces where the kids are taking it through this whole writing process. And it's just like, Jana and Kim were just talking about. So tell everybody what it is y'all are getting ready to do. You're doing the Industrial Revolution.
We're focusing, I know we're supposed to let them pick, but at this stage we're teaching them how. So we're going to assign them, they're doing inventions, and I'm going to have them do the research on the inventions and do their dash notes and get their facts and then Jana has a writing topic for them about their invention. I don't know exactly what your writing topic
Yeah,
is.
we're
but,
doing historical fiction now.
Mhm.
So I was trying to tie something in with that wasn't
Yeah.
so difficult.
Okay.
So we're gonna.
And then you were saying, and one of the things, you didn't need to say, I know you're supposed to let them choose. When you're in the content area, you are choosing the big overarching topic. And they have choice as to which, underneath that, they have some choices there.
Yeah.
And then in the ELA classroom, the ELA teacher is choosing the genre that they're going to be writing in, but they are choosing what that will look like, sound like, will be within that genre based on the information they've gathered from the research. How are they going to infuse that information into the historical fiction that they're writing in there? So, this is again how we're going to be doing a lot of working together trying to figure this out. And again, thinking, okay, so just who is going to be responsible for what and teaching these kids?
And I am going to take on the responsibility during the research of trying to help them understand what, I saw it there where they have to be able to determine what's a relevant source and
Yes.
what's not. So I'm going to try to go over some of that with them too.
Yeah. So there, already we have that going on, exactly what we're talking about here. Fabulous. Okay. When we talk about the balance of narrative, persuasive, and informational text in Common Core State Standards, this is looking at the reading. And this is based on NAEP. So Common Core based their recommendations on NAEP. But when you look at these numbers, looking at 8th grade here, where we say they should be reading 45% literary text and 55% informational text. This is not just in the ELA classroom. This is across the day. So that big, 55% informational text. Yes, the ELA teacher needs to have kids reading more informational text in the ELA classroom, but they're not going to read less literary text. They're going to read more of everything. That was a huge thing in an ASCD Smart Brief that came out last week, talking about we're not saying kids read less literary text. We're saying they read more of everything. They read more informational text. They continue reading literary text that they've been reading, and it's across the day that we're looking at the times, not these percentages, not just in an ELA classroom.
That just means that the rest of us have to up what they're reading in our
Yeah.
rooms.
Yes.
The types of text.
Yes.
Because that informational text should be happening in our rooms.
Yes, and it should be happening in all classrooms. Like might be a time when Jana is focusing, Jana and Carolyn and Eloise and Rhonda are focusing, doing a unit of study on informational text. But that would just be a unit of study they do. That's a genre, an area they're focusing on, during the year. Whereas every day in the content areas, they need to be reading informational text. So, yeah, all of that is going to take some discussion about getting those sources in their hands and, how to make that happen in the time that you have.
And I wanted to mention too that something we're going to do, which I thought was interesting, is they're taking their social studies books to their ELA class to use some of that information from there to help with their writing prompts. So
Yeah. So there again, that might need that passing of those resources back and forth as kids are needing to use them in the various classrooms. So a lot of thinking has to go into this. And this comes directly from the Common Core Standards. I believe it's page 5 in the introduction. The percentages on the table reflect the sum of student reading, not just reading in ELA settings. Teachers of senior English classes, for example, are not required to devote 70% of reading to informational text. Rather, 70% of student reading across the grade should be informational. As with reading, the percentages in the table reflect the sum of student writing, not just writing in ELA settings. So this is, important for everybody to, recall that. And then here is the distribution of the writing frameworks. Grade 4, 8, and 12, and we'll look specifically at grade 8. This is writing. Writing to persuade, 35%. Writing to explain, 30%. Writing to convey experience, that was 35, and this is 30%. So this is what, the explain, informative, explanatory, this is what we're looking at today. And there again, that's not just in the ELA classroom, it's across all classrooms. And look at by grade 12, 40% of their time to persuade, that's the argument writing. 40% to explain, that's informative explanatory writing, and 20% to convey experience, that's the narrative writing. And again, it's across their day, not just in an ELA classroom. Okay, very quickly, all of you in your packet have a list of professional texts. I'm just going to quickly talk about this. This is another one of the books that I think would be beneficial for all teachers to have, is this Energize Research Reading and Writing. Because again, it's got strategies in there that you can refer to say, okay, here are some research, some strategies to teach kids how to be independent in doing research, how to narrow down topics, how to take notes. Those are the kinds of things that you get from that. Get It Done. There's a series of books by Jeffrey Wilhelm, Michael Smith, and James Fredrickson, and they talk about each of the 3 domains or modes of writing. This one, Get It Done, is writing and analyzing informational text to make things happen. In this book, they deal, I think it's Jeffrey Wilhelm was the main author of this one. He does a lot of talking about those structures, the 10 structures of informational text. And it's really teaching kids how to recognize and use these different structures in their writing. This book teaches them how to do the research. Then this one teaches, again, how to use those different structures, cause and effect, question, answer, compare, contrast, sequential, numerical, all the different types of structures for informative text. This book, Comprehension and Collaboration, Inquiry and Action, this is a book that really lets you see what inquiry circles look like in classrooms. And you have examples of elementary, middle, and high school classrooms and what these research or inquiry circles could look like. How many of you have heard, whether you're ELA or not, of literature circles? Okay, so this is Harvey Daniels was the one who kind of, made literature circles popular, I'll say. He and Stephanie Harvey, who does a lot of work with nonfiction text, got together and they said, okay, let's take these 2 concepts, put them together, and instead of literature circles, we have inquiry or research circles. So this is what, thinking about what would it look like in my classroom if I set it up as a research workshop. This, helps you see that. And there's 2 DVDs that you can get that show classrooms. One's elementary and one's secondary. But I do have those, and so at some point in time, we'll look at examples of those. The next one, The Story of My Thinking. This is Gretchen Burnaby, who does a lot of work with Barry Lane, if any of you have ever heard of Barry. But anyway, Gretchen has taken 13 different expository writing situations, and she gives strategies for, that you can use in your classroom, take straight from here, use in the classroom for that expository writing. We're focusing more on the informative writing today. she goes into the expository writing in this book. And then Nonfiction Matters. This one is this is one by Stephanie Harvey that goes into the teaching kids to read and write informational text. This is one, I think it's been around a long time. This is for grades 3 through 8. In the late 90s, I think, when Stephanie first published that, the work she's been doing. The No Nonsense Guide to Teaching Writing, the unit of study that you have a copy of in your handouts, feature article came from this book. And the mini lessons that I'll be doing on feature article came from this book. So this has several units of study on writing in the book. And then we've already talked about pathways. This one is great when you're trying to help kids see the crafting techniques that teachers, that writers use, and looking at mentor text. This one is on nonfiction text. They have one on narrative text as well. But this one, for our purposes today, some of the examples of books that we're going to look at are examples of the nonfiction text that they suggest that you use for mentor text. And then this one's not on that list. This is another one that I just got recently, but goes back to that looking at text complexity. It doesn't so much have the strategies in there, but it helps us understand what is meant by text complexity. And it helps us look at the 3 different legs, as Common Core calls it, of how they're making the decisions as to just how complex a text is. So what they do a great job of explaining. This is Text Complexity, Raising Rigor in Reading by Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and Diane Lamb. But they take the 3 legs of, the quantitative, which is the Lexile, is what Common Core uses. The qualitative, which are characteristics that, there are about 10 different characteristics of text that they look at. And then the reader and the demands of the task they're asking the reader to do. So they really help us understand this whole concept of text complexity. So that's what, and again, that was just one on reading, but it's one that helps us understand what it is we're doing with kids here. Okay. I have been in several content classrooms now, and in most of those classrooms I've seen either learners' notebooks, learners' journals, or some way of keeping notes that their kids are taking in class, and for their learning. Alan has his notebooks set up very carefully, and the kids write on one side when they're taking notes, and they do examples on the other side. So this is one of the things, one of the ways of keeping some writing in classrooms. When I'm talking about a research notebook, this is a place to practice all of that note-taking where, the kids are taking notes themselves, where they are having to determine what is important enough to write down. One of the things that when I'm doing research projects, one of the things that I tend to do, and this is not a have-to kind of thing, this is just a Marie kind of thing, I tend to have my kids have a research notebook for each research project that we're working on. So that all the research, and it might be that we just take some, it might even be that we take a section, if we have a notebook where, like a composition book, a section of that, and all of, so that we have all of our notes together for that project, all of that section of it. And I might put a tab in there or something so that we can find it easily. But sometimes I can just take, pieces of notebook paper and staple them together, and this is our research notebook for this project that we're doing. But some way for kids to keep together all of their practicing and note-taking for many purposes